In Japan, when you say tabletop role-playing games, or table talk role-playing games as they're called there, they say Call of Cthulhu. It is so popular that D&D is actually sometimes referred to as Call of Cthulhu dressed up in swords and fantasy. Why is it so popular in Japan? Hi. Today, I want to dive a little bit into why Call of Cthulhu became so popular in Japan. Unlike Western campaigns that span months and months, Japanese RPG culture leaned toward one-shot, single-session stories, quick to play, easy to rotate, easy to try new systems and new games. What is Call of Cthulhu exactly? It's a horror game where you and a group of investigators, you hunt down forbidden knowledge, you fight horrors of unspeakable evil, and you most likely go insane and die. Really, really a fun game. So what is it exactly that made Call of Cthulhu so popular? And even more impressive, women make up over 50% of the players in Japan today. So yeah, let's dive in and learn a little bit about why their tabletop scene is so different from ours here. To understand Call of Cthulhu's historic rise in Japan, we have to go back to the roots of the Japanese tabletop RPG scene. So, let's first go all the way back to 1986, when Call of Cthulhu was first translated into Japanese by Chaosium/the Kadokawa Corporation. It was on the scene 3 years before Japan's own homegrown Sword World was on the scene. Sword World RPG is basically a D&D lookalike that copied a lot of lore, a lot of like the fantasy elements, but you know, it's much lighter on mechanics. And D&D was actually available in Japan back in 1985, but they had a whole troubled history when in 1997, Wizards of the Coast took over, and they actually discontinued the Japanese version for a couple years. In the Japanese tabletop industry at the time, Sword World pretty much was the top player all the way from 1989 up until 2012. And that's kind of when Call of Cthulhu hit a huge boom and really took off. Why did Call of Cthulhu take off the way that it did? In 2009, there was an anime light novel series called Hayore Nyaruko-san. In 2012, an anime adaptation came out of this anime light novel, and it became a huge hit. It's a magical girl comedy featuring a cutesy anime version of a Lovecraftian god called Nyarlathotep. This Lovecraftian god who embodies a cute anime girl falls in love with a regular Japanese boy. Other Lovecraftian gods show up and, you know, chaos and hijinks ensue. The anime's director, Tsuyoshi Nagasawa, was a huge Call of Cthulhu fan. He played the RPG, he loved it, and he absolutely loaded the show with Easter eggs and references. And that really contributed to the popularity. So from 2012 to 2015, which is how long the anime ran, it actually even had a theatrical movie release at the end of its run. Anytime people looked up Cthulhu to learn more about it or wanted to understand more of Cthulhu content, they found a lot of replays of the Call of Cthulhu RPG. So replays are uniquely a Japanese phenomenon. It's basically a video or written log of a tabletop role-playing game session, and it's usually edited with anime art, a voice synthesizer, like, you know, those text-to-speech synthesizers, and some sort of hacked dating sim engine. So it's basically like the modern day Let's Play or actual play that are really popular here, but it's the Japanese version of it. Some replays actually became so compelling that they were even turned into a whole anime series, like The Record of Lodos War. So these replays made Call of Cthulhu RPG really accessible. You didn't need to read a giant rule book or multiple rule books to understand the rules. All you had to do was watch some videos online and you could learn. And it taught people how to play the game in a really easily digestible format. In Japan, horror is a super beloved genre. But the thing that made Call of Cthulhu stick wasn't like the fear that you get in the playing, it's the failure when you play. The idea that players could lose, die, and go insane wasn't seen as bad in the game. Because I think horror as a genre expects things to go wrong, players don't feel bad for failing if they died in the game, right? I feel like in fantasy, when you fail or things go wrong, it feels like, you know, people aren't willing to try. But like, Failures were kind of seen as perfectly acceptable in this genre, and so that made the game more emotionally safe to play, and I think it made it just more compelling for wider audiences. And that attitude really resonated. It turned the pressure of performing into immersion. The horror genre made failure acceptable. You don't have to win, you just have to survive. Masayuki Sakamoto, who is a big Call of Cthulhu scenario writer, had even said that when the players fail, it's not their fault, it's just horror. In Japanese Call of Cthulhu scenarios, they're set in Japanese settings instead of in like 1930s, 1920s America that we're used to. Most scenarios that people play are just regular familiar settings, you know? Your girls in a school, your salaryman at an office, your friends on a trip, but the whole thread that links everything together is that you're just unraveling some sort of cosmic mystery. So, unlike fantasy games, Call of Cthulhu doesn't require any lore, right? It's a mystery. The whole point is that you're trying to uncover things as you play. You don't have to know what an elf is or what the difference is from an elf and a tiefling and a goblin and all of that. The whole point is like, you don't know what Lovecraftian gods are. You don't know what's going on, and you figure it out as you go. And I think that's really appealing to a lot of people, and it's much broader than the fantasy scope, right? Another great reason that Call of Cthulhu was able to thrive in Japan is that Chaosium, who is the publisher of Call of Cthulhu, really supported the fan base with a clear license for how their creators can contribute to the game. So over half of all Call of Cthulhu scenarios in Japan are fan-made. So Kadokawa handled translations and distribution, and players made tools, accessories, and endless replay videos all perfectly legally and had no problems with it. In 2020, the 7th edition launch of Call of Cthulhu caused another spike in sales for the game. Today, Call of Cthulhu sells more copies in Japanese than all other languages combined, including English. That's how popular it is in Japan. It's absolutely mind-blowing, honestly. Entire shelves in Japanese RPG stores like Yellow Submarine are dedicated to just Call of Cthulhu, and half of those shelves don't even have officially licensed content. It's all the fan-made scenarios. It's really, really cool to see publishers care about their fan base, and they know that like by allowing the people to just contribute, you're only gonna get more in return. And Call of Cthulhu is really like the perfect study for that. Another thing that's really interesting to me about Call of Cthulhu in Japan is that it's really popular among women. I know that in the West, more and more women are starting to play tabletop role-playing games, and there is a huge, subset of women who play D&D, but in Japan, like Call of Cthulhu is, at least online, the gender split is pretty much 1-to-1. If anything, there might be almost more women who play the game than men. The game's flexibility really allows it to become anything that you want, Like it can be mystery, it can be romance, it can even be slice of life sometimes. It's really common actually in Japan to play one-on-one sessions where people even use Call of Cthulhu RPG as a dating activity. You go to a session and it's just you and the keeper, and they come up with like some sort of scenario where it's just one-on-one. It's really interesting. Problem solving and storytelling are way more important than combat in this game, and horror scenarios can always be swapped out for something that's romantic or tragic or, anything really. Like there's no need to be limited to fantasy lore or optimizing your character sheet for things. You can just show up as a normal person and dive right into a story. In Japan or in Asia, when they hear the term LARPing, live action roleplay, they actually relate the term LARPing more to murder mysteries and like the whole Jubensha thing, which were like started out as live action murder mysteries. LARPing is not associated at all in a fantasy-like setting, which is really interesting to me because I feel like that's all we know, right? In the West, roleplay, more often than not, revolves around the races and classes of your character. Like, for example, in D&D, I feel like the class that you choose for your character really kind of dictates how you're going to play that character. Or at least that's something that I feel like limits it for me as somebody who's kind of new to role-playing still. But in Japan, with Call of Cthulhu, the way that they play, it really lets you build people with real personalities, with backgrounds, and with relationships that really matter to the game or to the scenario. Call of Cthulhu is much more suitable to incorporating your personality, incorporating emotional movements, and you know, it really does factor into how people play the game, and it really changes the tone of the table. There's a lot more humor in Japanese sessions. There's a lot more humor in the scenarios, and a lot of humor from the replay videos that were so popular, you know, back in 2012, really helped boosted the popularity of the game, because not only is it horror, but it's also really funny. And I think there's always something really alluring about dark comedy, right? Like, you can't have something super dark and horrible and not have something funny to go along with it. Otherwise, why would people do that? A lot of the scenarios that they play tend to be modern versus the romanticized periods of history that we do here in the West. And Western scenarios are usually focused on accomplishing missions, whereas in a Japanese scenario, they tend to favor saving NPCs instead of, you know, stopping the cultists or whatever. Not necessarily just solving the case, but on understanding what broke a person or what broke the world in the first place. After all that, we feel like Call of Cthulhu isn't just a horror game in Japan, it's a storytelling engine. It's a game where humor and heartbreak sit side by side. And it's more than just an RPG. It's a platform for storytelling, for community, and it's an absolute boon for creativity. It supports the kind of stories that Japanese people are already familiar with, you know? They're emotional, they're character-driven, they're personal. Like, when's the last time you watched an anime and you weren't just like, you know, rooting for the main character? Call of Cthulhu really allows people to explore themes of fragility, of connection, and really discovering the unknown. So, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this dive into the Japanese tabletop role-playing culture, hit like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if you want more videos like this. And I really want to know, like, what tabletop RPG is the most popular in your country? Is it D&D? And if not, let us know what it is, because it's really interesting to find things like this about Japan. Like, I never knew that Call of Cthulhu was so popular until we went there recently, and yeah, it was really fun to dive deep into why it became so popular and why it is the way that it is. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.